Yeah. You ought to give God some praise right now, wherever you are. Wherever you are. Knowing that God is the one that is able to sustain you, mind, body, spirit. It's God that clothes us in our right mind and enabled us, drew us, called us to be together in this space of worship right here, right now. You might have thought you woke yourself up, but it was God divinely calling your name, inviting you into a brand new day with new mercies. Woo! Thank y'all this morning. Why don't you help me send up some emojis and give the praise team some love this morning. Give the band and our sound team and all those who are helping make this worship possible. Give them some love this morning, family. Oh, I'm so grateful to be here this morning. This morning's message as we continue our One Word That Can Change Your Life series. This morning's word, and we're going to try it again, y'all. We had a little technical difficulty last week, but the word is fear. And we're going to Philippians, the 4th chapter, and the Message version. And I'd like to read verses 1 through 9. Here, Paul is writing to the church in Philippi. My dear friends, I love you so much. I do want the very best for you. You make me feel such joy. You fill me with such pride. Don't waver. Stay on track. Steady in God. Now verse 4. Celebrate God all day, every day. I mean, revel in Him. Make it as clear as you can to all you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. Help them see that the Master is about to arrive. He could show up any minute. Verse 6, don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. Before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the center of your life. I want to read that again. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces, transforms, removes worry from being at the center of your life. Summing it all up, friends, I'd say you'll do best by filling your mind and meditating on things true and noble, reputable and authentic, compelling and gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Put it into practice. I'm going to say that again. Put into practice. Put into practice what you learned from me, what you heard and saw and realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into His most excellent harmonies. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we come before you this morning, and we are excited, exuberant with the sense of your presence here with us. Not just with some of us, but with all of us. You're as close to us as the very breath we're breathing. So we breathe you in now. And we say thank you. Thank you that you're not through with us. That our very presence in these bodies reminds us that you are yet calling us into our most expansive lives. Thank you. And so, God, I ask that you would open our understandings this morning, that we might receive something transformative out of your word. Change our hearts, oh God. Make them ever new. Change our hearts, oh God, that they might be like you. Speak, Lord. This is our prayer. Amen. So this morning's title, while the one word is fear, this morning's title is Understanding Fear as You Learn to Live into Your Most Expansive Life. I love this passage in Philippians where Paul, who is in prison, writes to the church at Philippi. And he first starts out by saying, I love y'all. I just want you to know how much I love you. And so I say that to you this morning, as God says over all of us, how God loves us. Yes, Paul is in prison, and you might speak of it in terms of the pandemic. He's quarantined. Separated from family and friends, separated from his faith community, just as we are today. And yet Paul writes this letter to the Philippians knowing that when we are experiencing change, all kinds of things come up for us. When we're experiencing the opportunities to grow into our most expansive selves, anxiety shows up. And we might just begin to get on each other's nerves. And perhaps that's why in verses 2 and 3, he says to Euodia and Syntyche, y'all work it out. Work it out. And then he says to the church at Philippi, y'all help them. These women have been in this ministry from day one. Empower them to move through whatever's going on. You see, sometimes when we're experiencing change, when we're experiencing the challenge of circumstances and situations that are outside of our control, we can begin to find our relationships challenged. And so Paul, from prison, quarantined, writes and tells them to work it out. I love the fact that in the next few verses, Paul, particularly in verse 6, begins to say to them, be anxious for nothing. And don't be fearful in this situation. Don't allow your anxiety, your fear to control you, right? And so this morning, I want to suggest to us that as we find ourselves moving, being called into our most expansive lives, we got to understand our relationship to fear. You see, fear is not present to us to keep us from moving forward. Rather, fear is our invitation to do the spiritual work so that we might move forward. What fear does is it shows up to say to us, you are getting ready to move into uncharted territory. You're being invited to grow beyond your wildest imagination. I recently read a little article by author Makita Pennycook, and she says this: if there is one thing, she's an entrepreneur, so she frames this as an entrepreneur. She says, if there's one thing that can be said about the entrepreneurial journey, she said, and really any journey, new relationship, bringing a baby into the family, unemployment, looking for employment, experiencing employment and the challenges, any journey that we find ourselves on regarding our finances, our relationships, our vocation, how we're called to serve in the world, any journey in terms of our health and how we're going to move forward to be our most expansive selves in our bodies, any journey that we find ourselves in involves doing things that you've never done before. When you see yourself on a journey and you're being invited to do things you've never done before, expect fear to show up. She said it's always scary, And for us, it's important to recognize that fear is a constant companion for anyone doing something new, and it usually presents itself in a very similar way. If you look at your life and all the times you've been invited to grow, you'll see fear popping up, and it usually wears the same costume every time. Shows up ringing the same bells, pushing the same buttons. But I want to suggest to us that sometimes when fear shows up, we have a wonderful opportunity to understand what fear has to offer us. Makita goes on to say that in her article that Tara Moore spoke about the fact that there are two fears in the Hebrew language. The two fears that she drew on from the teachings of a Jewish rabbi and the Hebrew language. And these fears point to the fact that there are different ways that we can think about and process and understand fear. So the two fears are these. The first is Pachad, P-A-C-H-A-D. The second fear is Yireh, Y-I-R-A-H. I hope you got some paper and some pen to take some notes, because I'm going to share a practical spiritual practice for us being able to move through and understand our fear. And I want you to jot it down, so grab your pad. But here, let's go back to Pachad. Pachad is the fear of projected or imagined things. You know, Pachad is the fear that when you get the pink slip from the light bill, that you get that bill and you start thinking, not only are my lights going to get turned out, but my gas is going to get turned off. And they're going to turn off the water. And before you know it, I'm going to lose my house and I'll lose my equity. And I'll be living on the 45 and the Pierce elevator next to St. John's. That is Pachad. That's the imagined fear, when we use our imagination against us. That's the fear where we scare ourselves to death, literally. Pachad is that fear when we allow our imaginations to run wild over us. That's Pachad. This is a kind of worrying, a fearful foreboding. This is believing that the worst will happen, that the absolute most disastrous thing will come out of whatever we're experiencing. That's Pachad. Marianne Williamson said that she heard someone saying that worrying is a way of praying for the worst outcome. Let me say that again. Worrying is a way of praying for the what? Worst outcome. When one's mind is confused by fear, you're in no position or condition to accept the opportunity that you're being invited into. I want to suggest to you that, first of all, scientists said there are only two fears we're born with: the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. Everything else we've trained ourselves to experience as fear. Everything else, our family, our society, our culture has indoctrinated us to believe it as fearful. But we have a tool, and the tool is understanding. And so I'm going to show you how to use understanding as a way of leaning into what fear has to offer us. The second kind of fear is Yireh. Yireh is the kind of fear that overcomes us when we suddenly find ourselves in a space or a place that we are not accustomed to. When we find ourselves with a kind of energy and a kind of power, a kind of capacity and possibility that we had not anticipated. I'm going to give you an example. In the book of Joshua, in the first chapter in Joshua, God comes to Joshua and says, "Moses, my servant, is dead." And when he says this, Joshua, I can only imagine, begins to experience fear, because then God says, "Be strong and be courageous." And he says it to him several times in that first chapter. Why? Because Joshua is experiencing Yireh. Yireh is when you're being called to become your greatest self, your best self. Yireh is when you're being called to step into some places and some ways of thinking and being and living and serving that you had never imagined for yourself. And see, in the case of Joshua, not only was he being called, but he's being called to lead the people into their own Yireh, their own way of being, of their most expansive selves as they claim the land that God had promised to their ancestors. That's Yireh. It's the place when we step into the call of God for us, the call that God has on our life to move into that next space, the next season, the next way of being. And there's something very holy and sacred about it. Yireh is the sense that we're standing on holy ground. As I look at Yireh, Yireh is present as a deep certainty that the work that you're doing is soul work. So I loved it with David saying, it is well with my soul. When we're operating with the realization that Yireh, this fear that is present to us, that is a fear that invites us to understand we're being called into something greater, called into something deeper and wider than we had imagined, called into possibilities by Yahweh, Jehovah, God. Yireh is the fear of knowing that we are occupying a space that is significantly outside of our comfort zone. Makita also said that acknowledging Pachad, that fear that comes up to scare us to death, that we are totally in control of, because we can begin to understand that fear and reprogram our way of being with it. She says because acknowledging Pachad is important, because ignoring it will only strengthen its resolve. But decide that you're not going to let it stop you from stepping up or moving forward. Fear is largely the cause of failures. The only known remedy for fear is understanding. I love this because Paul, in his letter to the church at Philippi, he says to them, now let me tell you, you're going to be anxious. Notice he says, be not anxious. Why? Because he knows that they're human and they're going to feel anxiety. Why? Their leaders imprisoned. They're having to, in essence, fend for themselves as leaders, try to figure it out, try to work it out. We've all been there. A very vulnerable position to be in. And so he tells them, don't be anxious. And then he says, but pray. He says, pray and praise in such a way that it works your worry into a prayer before God. Working our worry into prayer. The invitation, the practice that Paul offers them. And so I want to offer us a practice as well. Because I think for so long, we've just been trying to outrun fear. I want to invite us to stop, to breathe, and to begin to invite fear to share what it has to offer. You see, I kind of think of fear as a mailman showing up with information. Sometimes the mailman, the mail woman, the mail carrier brings me bills. Sometimes the mail carrier brings me packages. Sometimes the mail carrier brings me a thank you note every now and then, or a birthday greeting. You don't shoot the mailman. You get the mail. Fear is the mailman. Get your mail. Get your information that fear wants to offer. So I want to offer you 5 steps for understanding and moving through fear so that you can become your most expansive self. I hope you've got a pen. Here they are. Number 1, I want to invite you to sit up tall and straight in your seat. Put your feet flat on the floor. Turn your hands palm side up. You know this. Breathe. That's step number 1. Breathe. I was driving recently. Matter of fact, this week I had a doctor's appointment, and I just decided to put my GPS on. Now, I knew how to get to the doctor's office, but I was open for some adventure. So I decided that I would take a different route, and I would go whatever way the GPS told me to go. Now, normally, I take Shepherd to 610 and turn left. GPS said turn right. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to the medical center. Why am I headed to the Galleria? I get on 610, per the instructions, and then she tells me to exit to 69 north. And so I'm looking for the exit. But y'all, I was looking for that old exit. And so I saw that I needed to get over into my right lane, which she instructed. And before I knew it, I was on a very high bridge. Now, I usually don't have no problem with bridges, but this one kind of snuck up on me. And that's what fear will do. It'll sneak up on you. So that's why it's important for us to have spiritual practices so we know what to do. Time fear shows up. And so I did what I'm going to tell you to do. I took a deep breath, and I kept my eyes on where I wanted to go. Breathe, step one. Step two is this. Partition the paradigm. You see, when fear shows up, we already have a story around it. That's what our paradigm is. Our paradigm is what we've been believing about fear. We've been treating fear as something we had to run from versus something we get to understand as an instructor, as the mail carrier bringing us information. And so I began to notice when I partitioned the paradigm that the way and the place I felt fear in my body was right in here, in my gut. So I breathed in, and I sent the breath into the gut. And within seconds, the fear was gone. So step one, breathe. Step two, partition the paradigm. Notice where it's showing up in your body. And then breathe into that space. Step three, surround the paradigm with love. In other words, don't say, get out of me, I shouldn't be feeling anxious. Say to yourself, you know, I'm so grateful that this anxiety has shown up, and now I can love on it. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for having my stomach feel like it's in knots. Thank you, because now I can breathe into that, and I can release the tension that I've been holding on to. So you can surround your paradigm with love. If you think of someone who really loves you or someone you really love, and then come out of that space of love and send it to wherever the paradigm is showing up. Maybe it's showing up as a pain in the neck or tension in your shoulders or something happening with your throat or your head. Surround it with love and thank it for showing up. When you surround it with love, then you ask it, how are you trying to serve me right now? This feeling in my gut, how are you trying to serve me right now? And listen for how it speaks. What I heard was, this isn't the way we normally go, and I'm just trying to keep you safe. And so I thanked it. Thank you. But I no longer need that. I'm trying a new way. I'm moving into a new way of being. So you surround your paradigm in love. The fourth point is this. Once you get the information from the paradigm and you've asked it, how is it trying to serve you, and you get your answer, thank it. Then partner with God, your higher power. And just like you asked the paradigm, how was it trying to serve you? Now ask God, okay, God, I know what the paradigm is saying. What are you saying to me? And then God says, I'm inviting you into your most expansive self. And so you trust that. You trust that that's exactly what God is doing. And so what I want to say to us as I bring us to this place of close is that the fifth point is this: take action. Once you've talked to God and God has said what God is trying to do, then take an action. And so in my case, I stepped on the gas. I was on that hill. I couldn't do 35 miles an hour, so I sped up to the speed limit. And I took action. And I made it to my destination with plenty of time. Here's what I want to say to you. Your dream is waiting on the other side of your fear, just like my doctor's appointment was waiting on the other side of my fear. When you befriend your fear, you can gain understanding. Accept your call. Accept that God is calling you into your most expansive self, your most expansive life. I won't read the whole thing, but Marianne Williamson says this: our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Matter of fact, why don't you read this with me? It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So family, befriend your fear. Understand what fear wants to offer you. And know that fear shows up because it's time. It's time for you to live and to be your most expansive self. I love you, family. See you Wednesday night for Bible study. Make it a great week.